Welcome, everybody, to There's Too Many Podcasts. It's a podcast about podcasts. My name is Chris Sheeman. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our very first episode. What the hell are we doing here, you might be wondering? Well, it started with a Reddit conversation, believe it or not. I am a broadcaster, and my first love is radio. I'll talk more about that in episode 2. But I've worked in broadcasting for a long time. And what I miss, now that pretty much everything that I do in broadcasting is remotely, I missed talking about broadcasting with people. And of course, there is no broadcasting right now anymore. There's no radio anymore. It's all in the world of podcasts. So I thought, after this conversation and after it kind of re-energized my juices, a podcast about podcasts, of course. And yes, the title is tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but it really is going to be a laid-back, no thrills. I don't do a lot of notes. I don't do a lot of homework. I don't do a lot of research. It's just people talking about a podcast and things that they love and what they're passionate about. And that's really it. That is what the premise of all of these episodes collectively will be. Now, that said, today is a very special episode for me. And I decided not to edit this thing at all, as a matter of fact. It's me and Mike Chisholm. Mike Chisholm hosts the Letterman Podcast. David Letterman is an important figure to almost anybody of my age at 41 years old who went into broadcasting. And I'll tell you more about the story with Mike. But I want to say a couple things here about Mike. Doing a new podcast when you don't have an audience. What I'm finding here in this first season is getting people to say, yeah, we want to be a part of that. It's not easy. There are people in the broadcasting world who think very highly of themselves and their craft. Sometimes rightfully so, but sometimes they take it to an unhealthy level. And even though we're going to talk about David Letterman today, I want to talk about Conan O'Brien first. He said something that has always resonated with me and a lot of young broadcasters who watched his debacle of a Tonight Show run. And at the end he said, don't be cynical, be kind to people. And you will go somewhere. You will go far with that. And when I talked to Mike today, that is really what stood out. This is a kind person who has been able to build this David Letterman podcast into such a success because he's just a kind person. And that's really where it starts and ends with him. He was so generous with his time today. He's so joyful about his work, about Letterman, about our conversation today. And it was really, really nice to talk to somebody like that. I grew up in the Midwest. I have a cynicism much like David Letterman. It's why I like David Letterman so much. I identify with him being from Indiana. I'm from Ohio. Dave's from Indianapolis. I'm from Cleveland. Very similar things. It's cynicism. It's the decaying Rust Belt. It's growing up around people who say, well, that won't work. So when I meet guys like Mike, it sort of has to reset my battery a little bit. But I always appreciate it, and I always love it. And now I understand why he's so successful, why Shecky wanted to help him, why so many people have been a guest. He's had some really big names we'll get into. So anyways, you're really going to enjoy just a really nice conversation with just a really nice man. Here's Mike Chisholm. And by the way, before I continue this, let me just reiterate. I did not edit anything, so we're going to jump right in. Normally what you do with a podcast is you do a little sound check, and you kind of chat back and forth. How's your day going? That kind of stuff. It's a lot of nonsense, small talk. Mike and I went right from 0 to 100. So you're going to get basically an unedited version here at the beginning, and then, you'll see. Anyways, here it is again, Mike Chisholm. Enjoy. honest to God, Mike, I tell people, like, hey, let's use Skype, and it's like I'm speaking an 18th century tongue. It's like, Skype? The hell is a Skype?
I've just gotten to know Zoom, and now I'm hearing the scuttlebutt that the best podcasting software out there is something called Riverside, and I haven't gone down that path yet, but yeah, Skype is just one that I just haven't used in a long time, like 3 devices ago, probably.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I still have it. I'm glad it still works, and I'm glad we can do this together.
You and everybody else. I used to work in radio, and we would do like high school football games, and we basically got rid of phone lines, and we started using Skype because the audio quality is radio quality. So that's kind of why I still use it for this.
Yep.
But do you pay for the Zoom? So you have the professional Zoom account?
I do, yes. Absolutely, because some of our podcasts go 3 hours.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we that became apparently necessary almost immediately, and so went down that path. And the one thing about it is, you're right, the audio isn't perfect. Whereas I have monkeyed around with Riverside a little bit, and the audio is fantastic on that, on both ends. Like, you can literally, it won't noise cancel people. Like, you can talk over each other just like on radio.
Wow.
And I suspect it's like that with Skype as well.
We're going to find out.
Okay, so you're just starting this thing, right?
Oh, yeah. In fact,
how much you got in the bank? How many episodes you got in the bank?
Good God, Mike. I'm just trying to get people to do these interviews. It's atrocious. Like, so this is 2.
This is number 2. Okay. Hey, you're preaching to the choir. I don't book both my shows. Now, HeCast is, I've got a small team now that's booking HeCast, thank goodness. But the Letterman Podcast, I booked that sucker myself. And so I know what you're talking about. And the pressures of having a weekly episode out can be daunting sometimes, especially in such a specialized topic. So, but that being said, I just don't feel like you're going to have a hard time. Like it's a neat concept that you have. Are you the only one doing this?
Yeah, this is, I researched, you mean as far as topics are concerned?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as far as I can tell, I might end up using all of this on the podcast, by the way. We've started well. My audio's a little low, but I think that's okay. Right now I'm doing audio checks here.
Yeah, it's fun. I like I like shows that have the banter beforehand. Like, if you listen to old episodes of Rogan where it was like sometimes people coming into the studio or Marin, sometimes the same thing. It's fun having the casual hangout atmosphere in these shows. And so I totally see where you're coming from when, like using this.
Well, I mean,
I don't know if it's entertaining, but it's certainly inviting.
Oh, none of this is entertaining. You and I both know that. But so I don't know where were we? What were we talking about before I changed the subject?
I think it was technology and audio technology and all that kind of fun stuff. No, it wasn't. It was, are you the only one doing a podcast on podcasts that you're aware of?
Yes, so I researched it, and I found a guy who was just kind of screaming into the void about how to do a podcast. And I said, well, this is not quite what I'm doing, what my idea is. So that's the only one I can find. So there are, I think, people doing podcasts about podcasts where they're reviewing them. Yep. This is more the process. This is, kind of maybe more nerdy stuff. I don't know. We'll see where it leads. But, I think that as far as this particular specific niche idea, this is it.
Well, it's going to lead to a deep dive of opinion and nuance. And I believe that, you're talking to a guy who is, I don't know if I'm the king of, but I would certainly be the duke of doing deep dives into the things that I love and always have done that. And the idea of podcasts, I love podcasts as a medium, and the nuance. When I look at my influences, the different nuances and things that I have either picked up or said, okay, no, I'm not. I am going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I really, really like them a lot. Like, I like, trying to figure out why I do the certain things that I do. It's certainly There's certainly a lot of people who have a lot of opinions on it with the Letterman podcast. My word, people's reaction to
Quite a
it,
fan
especially
base.
at first. Well, yes, and a variety of people have a variety of opinions as to what the show should look like, and when it doesn't look that way, because their concept of what a podcast should be, if I'm outside of that box and they like Letterman a lot, they voice a lot of displeasure at our show, which is interesting. But it's funny because there's so many differences. Like, some people like a conversation, some people like an interview, and they're very, very different shows.
Right.
If that's the case, right? So that's one little example of it. So it's going to be fascinating to hear the array of variety that you're going to experience going through this. I want to talk to you in 6 months and start picking your brain, actually.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We'll see if I have first season out in 6 months, because now it's April 28th when we're doing this. I had hoped to start rolling these out in May.
Yeah.
I will just tell you right now, probably not in May. But what I want to do is I want to get 5 or 10, because if people do start to listen, I don't want to go 6 weeks without an episode. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? So,
consistency, I think, is extremely important.
do you want to know what my first thought was when I watched the? I think I watched whatever the first episode was. I think I watched it. Do you want to know
Of the Letterman podcast?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Oh my gosh! Oh no! You watched episode 1?
I think my first initial reaction was like, this son of a bitch beat me to it. It's like, damn it. He got there first.
Oh, you know what? It's if you want to get into a bit of the origin story, it would be amazing. So when you're ready for me to tell you about the heartbreaking moment and the resurrection, and the restitution of that heartbreak that led me to actually doing episode 1. As soon as you're ready for me to tell you that story, I will.
Yeah, we'll get there. This is
okay.
I'm in charge here, Mike. You got to understand that.
I hear you. I hear you, and I feel you through the ones and zeros.
Oh my God! All right. Well, I think we've already started, because I'm not editing all of this. This is good stuff. So we're into the podcast, and the way I originally intended to start was I wanted to tell this story, and this will lead us to that point that you were going to go into. So this is beautiful.
Cool.
Couple of peas in the pod. This is Mike Chisholm, by the way. I'd never gave his full name, but you'll hear it in the intro. Anyways, a couple of weeks ago, maybe it was even longer, that Jerry Foley, when he passed away, and the Letterman people put up the tribute on his YouTube channel. And I started to watch it, and towards the end, basically what they did is there was this thing for LinkedIn when Letterman retired and all of these people had to go find jobs. LinkedIn did a comprehensive, I guess, interview, you could say, with all of Letterman's staff and the ones that wanted to continue to work and things like that. So when Jerry passed away, they originally cut part of that. And then at the end of the tribute, if you guys are Letterman fans and you haven't seen it, it's wonderful, this little montage. And I find myself starting to get very emotional. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, I don't know Jerry Foley. I'm sorry he's gone. He seemed like a great producer. We didn't know him the way that the 80s Letterman people knew. Oh, my God, I'm blanking on that.
Hal Gurney.
Yeah, Hal Gurney. Yep. Thank you.
Jerry took over for Hal.
But I'm getting emotional here watching this tribute. And I'm thinking, well, okay, why am I having this reaction? Now, for me, Mike, it's about my dad. And I lost my dad about 4 years ago. And it was about the same time that the Dons put out the compilation of all of the Christmas Baby Please Come Home. So that first Christmas without my dad, I watched that. And I watched every single year, and I remembered literally what we were doing in that moment every single year that Darlene would walk out. And for me, that's kind of where the love of this show begins. It was my dad trying to find a way to bond. This is parenting genius, by the way. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Finding a way to bond with a 13 and 14-year-old son who is, teenagers are crazy people. You have nothing in common with them, and they're crazy. And this was it. And it led me to want to get into broadcasting. It led me to all of those things. So when I'm watching that Jerry Foley thing,
Yep.
that's where it comes from. So how about you, Mike? Where does this obsession with David freaking Letterman come for you?
You know what? There's a couple of ways that I can look at it. I've always been drawn to broadcasters. In my men's mental wellness podcast called HeCast, which is if I have any podcasting chops, they started to be developed there.
Nice plug.
I had my wife is building a men's mental wellness app called He Changed It, and so I said to her one day, I said, "Well, how can I help you other than to continue to provide for the family, that sort of thing? How can I help you with this thing?" And she said, "Well, I know you've always wanted to have a podcast. We have no money for marketing. Would you like to host a podcast?" I said, "Sure." So one of the guests that we had on was a guy by the name of Ron MacLean. Ron MacLean is in Canada, where I'm from, is the host of Hockey Night in Canada, and a legendary program in Canada that goes back. And he has been the host of Hockey Night in Canada since I was a boy. And somebody knew somebody, and so I did a bit of a retrospective in my mind about broadcasters that I have loved since childhood. And Mr. Rogers is the first one.
Yeah, right.
Because that's how I look at Mr. Rogers. I look at him as a broadcaster. He's many other things in what he does, but he communicates at an extremely high level. When he would communicate to us as children, he would talk to us like equals and simplify what he said, of course, to try and help with understanding. But at the same time, I learned the word assassination and what it meant from Mr. Rogers. Like, he just a communicator that was amazing. And as a very young boy, I attracted to him. The hockey broadcasters, Bob Cole and Harry Neal were the play-by-play guys on Hockey Night in Canada. But Ron MacLean, who hosted the show, welcomed you. Would do interviews with players or other members of the hockey community in between games, that sort of thing. I loved him. I also, as a kid, loved pro wrestling. So Vince McMahon and Gorilla Monsoon and some of these other people I was fascinated with. Then one night I had a sleepover at my friend Ryan's house, and shout out to Ryan. He was 8, 9 years old, and I knew my dad loved Johnny Carson. Like, I knew my dad would watch The Tonight Show, and I knew there was a show after The Tonight Show, but I didn't know very much about it.
Yeah, we were too young.
yeah, really young. But when you have a sleepover, all bets are off when it comes to bedtime.
The rules go out the window.
They do, and we flipped over. We were running around doing something, whatever, and we were flipping through the channels, and The Tonight Show had ended, and Late Night with David Letterman was on. And so if I'm 8 or 9 years old, we're talking 1985, and I was a 76 baby, and so I remember distinctly thinking to myself, "Oh my goodness, these adults get to act this way. Adults get to be silly." And it was and there was Dave at the desk with the microphone, similar to these broadcasters that I enjoyed. I probably did in my mind make a Carson type connection because it's a similar setup. But then they're doing these zany things, and it wasn't so much the interviews, obviously, at that point, but that came quickly. I remember in 1988 when Wayne Gretzky was traded. Or it was right around there where Wayne Gretzky was traded to Los Angeles from Edmonton, and so I'd watch Letterman at that point. There were other times where I would watch for certain people, and the interviews that sucked me in too, and I laughed at a lot of the stuff early on, and I just absolutely was taken with Dave, and then going through, of course, when the VCR showed up in our house. And then going through, I was in high school. It hit me right smack dab in the middle of the late shift was during my formative years.
Yeah.
And by that point there, I was watching Late Night every single night. And the moment he moved over to CBS, like, I'm pretty sure I've seen every single CBS show. And it was just my routine. It was my comfort food. He was, as described by many, Adam Sandler being a primary example, he was my best friend on TV. And I just absolutely was on Team Dave, and I loved everything about the show. And all the people who worked on it, the staff, I felt like I was in a secret club.
Yeah, that's exactly what they did so well for 30 years. They made you feel like you were a part of it.
Yes.
And you were in on the joke as well.
Yes. Exactly.
So you go. All right, we're fast forwarding now.
Sure.
Getting into this podcast.
Yes.
Tell me about everything that you said prior. Let's hear all of that good stuff right now.
Okay. Well, I mean, there's a lot of lily pads that led to this. I had an experience with the show a month before Dave retired, April 20th, 2015. I knew I needed to see Dave one more time. Like when he announced his retirement, I knew I needed to see him one more time. And then he announced when his last show would be. That was May 20th, 2015. In January or February, I started contacting the show. Coincidentally, or actually, I don't believe in coincidences. I really don't. My company was having a retreat in Jamaica I think it was April 25th, I think was when it was. And so I knew that was on the calendar. And so immediately I'm pestering the show. I've written a document called the Letter Manifesto. It's like 15,000 words, and it tells the entire story about how I got into the audience, onto the gold list, which put me into the front row. And that night I had an interaction with Dave during the Q&A.
Wow.
That interaction happened to be the night when the New York Times was doing their final spread on Dave before he retired. Normally, New York Times photographers are not allowed, or any media photographer for that matter. They had the CBS guy, John Philo, who's been on the show, and that was great in there taking pictures. But that night, there happened to be a photographer there, a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, in fact, who was taking pictures behind the scenes. And during the Q&A, Dave was using some Canadian in the front row as a comedy speed bag, and even to the point where the moment the show started, they did a callback to what happened before the show. You know, one of those little moments and they did a cut to this Canadian. The moment that communication was happening, in fact, it's Dave looking back at Paul, going, "Paul, these Canadians are supposed to be, they're supposed to be kind and all that," and he just starts. Yeah, that picture, a picture of that exchange was taken and put into the New York Times.
Wow. What a great memory for you.
It is. Dave has since signed the photo. He's actually signed 2 copies of the photo. The first one was, "Hello, Mike." I'm looking at it right now. "Hello, Mike. Nice seat, David Letterman." And the other one was, "To Mike, my best friend, David Letterman," which I am so grateful to have those. They're in the studio. Because I've got a studio here where I shoot the Letterman podcast in my house. One of Dave's bridges is behind me. So I feel like that was probably the lily pad that began. But please interrupt me, Chris, if you want. Please interrupt me here anytime. Like it's a bit of a long story.
Odds are my cat is going to interrupt you.
Outstanding.
She is very involved. So
what's her name?
If you're talking and you hear me go oof or get down or please for the love of God.
Okay,
that's her.
So if it's get down, it's not a hip hop command.
No, it means I'm already bleeding, Mike.
Oh, okay. Because I know how to get up, and then get down. I do know how to do that. Thanks to the early incarnations of hip hop, I did put those moves into my repertoire. What's the cat's name?
Meepy.
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 Okay,
Meepy.
well, we need to pause my story now to figure out the incarnate. Where did Meepy come from? What's the origin of that?
So my ex's cat.
Yeah.
I'm still great friends with my ex. The cat wants nothing to do with me when I visit, though.
Oh, really?
Cat takes the breakup very hard. Ex is probably relieved if we're being honest with each other here. Finally, this guy is gone. But anyways, so Meepy was her cat Rogue's nickname that I gave the cat because of the little meeps, the little meows that she not quite meows. So I knew when I got a cat, I wanted a talkative cat so I could kind of continue Rogue's universe, and that's how Meepy got her name.
Outstanding. And Rogue is, of course, the X-Men Rogue.
Yes. Well, I don't
Ouch.
know. I honestly don't know.
All right.
Tell you what,
Well,
I'm gonna text her.
okay.
You go
Oh,
in.
good idea. I
You
love doing this.
you go
I
into the. You go into the.
Yep.
We were. Have we hopped to the next lily pad yet?
We will. We're going to jump to the lily pad, but I love this. I do that sometimes in the Letterman podcast. I've done it a couple times. One time I texted Steve Young, prolific Letterman writer, Steve Young, unbelievable writer, Steve Young. We were talking. I forget who I was even talking with, but we were saying, what would your professional wrestler name be? And mid episode, I texted Steve Young and said, hey man, if you had a professional wrestler name, what would it be? And it's delightful when you do things like that mid-show and you can incorporate a little bit of, I don't know if that's meta. I don't know if I'm using that word right. But if you can incorporate a little bit of mischief and spontaneity into the episode. So I love that you're texting her right now to find out the origin of this cat's name. So a few years after Dave retired, so that the picture appeared in the New York Times and the New Yorker and all this sort of stuff. And I my experience was incredible. I also got my picture behind Dave's desk with my wife that night.
Right.
Just really, really good stuff. I loved it. I haven't changed my Facebook profile pictures since 2015. And so it's just that's what they are. And so now I've got the long hair and I'm older than I was back then. I'm 9 years older, but does not matter. Those are my pictures. And maybe perhaps if I see Dave and I do something together and I get that, maybe that will update the Facebook profile pictures, but it will not happen until then because it was just one of the greatest nights of my life. Scott Ryan, writer Scott Ryan, released The Last Days of Letterman, which is my favorite book on David Letterman, not discounting the other ones. They're fantastic. But Last Days of Letterman is an unbelievable book that chronicles the last 6 weeks of The Late Show with David Letterman, the lead up to Dave's retirement from late night television. And I was so taken with the book because it was an oral history. I think it was 28 or 29 staffers that contributed to it. And it was interviews that turned into a narrative. And so I reached out to Scott. He and I became friends. And he introduced me to a couple Letterman staffers, the chief being Rick Sheckman. And now Rick Sheckman was if you go onto the Letterman YouTube channel, watch the tribute to Shecky.
Yeah, Shecky, man.
Yeah, Shecky and I became good friends. And he was on a weekly Zoom panel with radio legend Alex Bennett. And so I've become friends with Alex Bennett since then because and every single week I would go on this panel with them and we got to know each other. And I'm pretty sure Shecky was kind of, because with Dave, there's a lot of people, there are a lot of people who are really kind of obsessed with Dave and probably unhealthily so. There are some. And I think Shecky, as we were getting to know each other, we're both big comic book fans just from different eras. We both collect sports memorabilia just from different eras. We both collect all sorts of pop culture stuff, movies. Shecky was one of the world's most cinephiles. At his funeral, Leonard Maltin was there and spoke. That gives you the gravity of who Shecky was in the cinephile world. And so we became friends, but I think he brought me on panel onto Alex's show every week just to make sure that I wasn't kooky,
a crazy person.
Too much of a crazy person, because I do maintain that I've got a little bit of the crazy. It's just the safe, happy, eccentric crazy, not the crazy that can go bad.
Right. And I have to think, I don't know if you've talked to his staff about this, but I have to think that they're probably pretty good at weeding that out.
One of the jobs that a lot of the writers started with was the writer's assistant. The writer's assistant many times is in charge of the mail. And I've had more than a few of these folks who were writer's assistants. And I always ask the question because the mailbag was such a seminal part of the show, both incarnations, both late night and late show.
Right.
And they would make so much hay out of letters that they receive. And so, and the thing I would always be, I am fascinated to this day with is, okay, how do you know if a letter has a play there? Like you get all these letters and of all sorts of different types. And how do you know that you can get some material out of this. And you just learn it. You just learn the culture of the bit along the way. Well, these people are also sifting through some stuff that can be pretty scary. And so, yes, I've certainly, and also a couple of Dave's assistants. I've talked to them on the show, and a couple of people off camera who haven't been on the show yet, who have talked about that. Dave is incredibly popular. He's incredibly polarizing, and he has a cult-like following from some people, and so there are people who, and of course, famously, the woman known collectively, I think, and universally as the woman who kept breaking into Dave's house.
Right. Yeah.
That was a very public one. And then there's, yeah. So anyway, I'm not that guy. And Shecky found that out pretty quickly. And we got to the point where outside of Alex's panel show, he and I would have these conversations on the phone or for Facebook Messenger or email or whatever. And Shecky basically opened up everything to me. Like everything. I mean, there are so many things that Rick told me about that show that are going to go to my grave, because I have zero judgment for anything to do with, like, I'm not a fan of cancel culture or anything like that. I mean, I've worked in an office, and in the office that I've worked in, I have seen every single behavior known to man and have no judgment, because people are just people, and that's how it is. And especially with that staff, they're a family. Well, I've also been in a family, and I've seen people in families, and I understand the dynamics of family, the ups, the downs, the whatever. But you've got this group of people who were so hell-bent on producing something of massive, massive quality. And yet at the same time, many, if not most of them, have this amazing eccentric quirk, sensibility that attracted so many people to just want to be part of it.
Right.
Yeah. And so Rick basically told, like, the stories that Rick told me about the show, I feel so blessed and fortunate to have been able to do a deep dive, not just with the people who are on camera. I mean, the podcast is cake. It's so much cake. Like, just the friendship with Rick and learning what I learned, all those stories that he told me, were just unbelievable. So one day we're on Alex's show, his panel show, and Rick says, he and Alex go back and forth all the time, and just, and there's 6 or 7 of us on there too that would ask questions, but many times it was just Rick and Alex, they're best friends, talking about stuff, and Rick was like, yeah, or Alex was like, hey, what are you doing later today, Rick? And he's like, oh, I got to go on this Letterman podcast thing. And Rick's from Queens, born and raised, like when he passed,
it's a
like,
great
lived
Queens
in the house
impression, by the way.
Like that was Rick. He just, I miss him. I miss him so much.
Maybe next
Chris,
time you get a flight to, I don't mean to discredit this emotional connection here, of course, but maybe next time you get a flight to New York, maybe look at Newark. I don't know if I'm landing at LaGuardia with that kind of imitation. I don't know.
Rick's voice was very distinct, and I every time I love it so much. I miss him.
It's beautiful. That's really beautiful.
He's like, yeah, I got to go on this Letterman. I got to go on this Letterman podcast, and you could actually see, like, because I'm a huge podcast fan, and I've always been wondering where the Letterman podcast is. Because, there's a podcast for everything. There's a podcast for everything where they're doing a deep dive on any subject imaginable, but there was never one on Letterman. And Worldwide Pants, at that time, they hadn't started the YouTube channel yet, because they started the YouTube channel, I believe, in February, and then our show premiered in April. But Rick, this didn't happen at that point. And so Rick said, I got to do this Letterman podcast thing. And in my mind, I knew that there was a part of me that was like, if I could give myself one job on the planet that paid, not paid, it doesn't matter. If there was one job on the planet, it's like when I was a little kid. What do you want to be when you grow up? I wanted to be a Ghostbuster. Okay. It didn't exist. The job wasn't real, but that's what I wanted to be.
Right. Yeah.
Once I become an adult, and if Mike, if you could design any job for you, what job would it be? And it would be, I'd say it'd be to host a podcast about David Letterman. But there was imposter syndrome stuff, and it was like, oh, why me? No, there's no way it could be me. It's got to be someone who's inside, or it's got to be a celebrity, or it's got to be someone like that. But I maintain that no one from Worldwide Pants would ever start a Letterman podcast because it's too self-serving, and none of these people are self-serving in any way, shape, or form. In fact, they're self-deprecating. They don't like to highlight the genius and the amazingness and the quality of the show that they worked on for however many years they worked on.
The one thing that I will say is,
yes,
it seems like, especially ever since they really started getting active on YouTube, they at least have started to acknowledge and understand what they did. And I don't know if Dave has. I don't know if Dave is the kind of person that ever will. But it seems like everybody else around him has kind of taken a step back, even Paul, to say, wow, this is really something.
I could not agree more. And let's you're mentioning the Letterman YouTube channel. And that is, anybody who is an enthusiast of David Letterman in any way, shape, or form, please subscribe to that YouTube channel. Please support it, make comments, share the videos, that kind of a thing.
Because they're really hurting for my support over there.
And Walter, the guy who he was the digital, the digital content guy, and many other jobs as well, was with the show for from late night all the way through the entire Late Show run. It's a guy by the name of Walter Kim. And Walter is a hell of a guy. He's just awesome. And now his title is executive producer for Dave, for Worldwide Pants, for the YouTube channel. And he has done an absolutely incredible job with this thing. And I mean, we could talk about Don Giller as well, but and I'm certain that at some point we will. But
Walter, I think we're required to legally.
Yes. Oh, as far as I'm concerned, we are. That man did the Lord's work for a long time when Dave was dark.
Absolutely.
The Don Giller YouTube channel. Please go visit that as well if you want to do deep dives. But Walter, I don't want to out anything, but there are some people who work for the show who are fans for the show. They're gigantic fans. But the culture is, you don't show that. You don't talk about that.
Right.
You don't, you gotta be a little too cool for school if you want to hang. You don't talk about how much of a fan you are for the show, but inside they absolutely are. They absolutely do know the impact and are excited as all get out to celebrate or talk about it or whatever. And so acknowledging, I think the YouTube channel does a pretty good job of celebrating some of this stuff without being self-serving and whatnot. Whereas my show, I'm an outsider. I flat out am puppy dog in love with what they did and unabashedly show it. So,
and that, I think, is really the importance to your success, at least in my opinion. And, going back, let's pause here because my ex did get back. Apparently her cat, I should have known this, by the way. This story was told to me. I mean, we were together almost 6 years, for God's sakes. We told each other, you've been married a long time. You've literally said everything you can say to this person where you start all over again. So I should have known this. This is my fault, Nicole.
Okay.
But anyways, her cat is named Rogue, and it's because it was a rogue cat. It was hanging out outside. Oh. Basically, Rogue was on her deathbed and just kind of wandered into Nicole's house. And Nicole kind of took her to her cousin, who's a vet, fixed her up. So that's where the name Rogue. It's not, but Nicole did say she likes the association with X-Men. So we'll go with a little column A, a little column B, but heavier towards column A. So there it is.
Yeah.
Folks.
What a great name. Rogue as opposed to Vagabond. I like Rogue better. As opposed to hobo. That's pretty great. I feel like we've done some good today, Chris.
We've really accomplished a lot here in 34 minutes so far, Mike. Mike Chisholm, Letterman Podcast. I do want to ask you a couple things I'm really curious about.
Okay.
Let's talk about some of the journalists you've interviewed. One of the
Yes.
reasons why I like you so much and I enjoy it, your take on Letterman fandom is because you're like me. I think you've got a few years on me, but
Mhm.
we're of the same age where I really appreciate the Late Show, especially again
Mhm.
going back to when I was a teenager with my dad. It was
Yep.
like you said during the whole Late Show Wars, which people can't comprehend what that was, but
No.
it started then and it went through the good times, the not so good times, the
Mhm.
uh, Carter Bay's times and
Mhm.
Craig Thomas times and so on. So that's
Yep.
where my appreciation of Letterman started. I have
Yep.
first of all, I know this is I'm going to get the hate. That's why you heard Mike snickering. Now it's my turn to get the hate because there are fans of the 80s show who absolutely disagree. And
Yep.
I don't want to take anything away from the 80s show, and what late night was the most incredible late night show maybe ever. I can't take anything away from that show. I'm just saying that for my generation, for my particular age in my life, it was always late show, not late night.
Yep.
I love the early art stuff. I think it's interesting. I don't
Mhm.
necessarily laugh as hard as I do at the silly nonsense of seeing Jared Mulligan walk out as Janet Reno. As soon as you talked about the mailbag, if you folks want to rewind, you'll hear me laugh immediately when he mentions the mailbag, and that's because that's the first image that comes to my mind is Jerry Mulligan as Janet Reno. But anyways,
Jerry is
did
a
you
hell of a guy.
what was your experience like talking to some of these journalists, especially
Yep.
Jason Zeineman specifically?
Yep.
Kind of is anti what we are. He's very much pro late nights and maybe not as keen on the late show as what was accomplished on late night. So I'm curious, did you think at all maybe to push him on that, or what is
Uh,
the process of talking to the journalist about Dave?
yeah, Chris, let me tell you this. With Zinnemann in particular, if there is one area I can push him on, he gave me what I would consider one of the most ultimate teases because he wrote, of course, Letterman, the Last Giant of Late Night, fantastic book,
Yeah.
chronicling and whereas I look at Bill Carter's books, Bill Carter wrote for the New York Times forever, LateNighter.com now, he's the editor at large. Bill Carter wrote two books, The Late Shift and The War for Late Night. He wrote them like they were thrillers. Jason did not do that when he wrote The Last Giant of Late Night, and he didn't want to release an 800-page book like one of these definitive textbook type books. And so one of the in my opinion, painful decisions that he had to make was to trim out essentially a book's worth of material that he has on Late Show. Now, as you can imagine, and I can feel the ravenous energy that you're feeling. I have been feeling it since the moment that discovery was made. It was a decision that was made because of the length of the book, and because the building blocks of what was built with David Letterman, the early years of Dave, which has never really come out. He did an unbelievable job of painting the picture of Dave in college radio, for example.
Right.
And also like some of his personal decisions, personal things that went on in his life, which led to him moving to California, and some of these things. But thinking about Dave during his college radio days and the rebellious nature, the irreverent zaniness that he did bring to whatever station that he was a part of. It was fascinating to have that. It was untold, and it really did a good job of constructing the origin story of Dave. Well, that took a lot of time, and then you get to Late Night, and there's a lot of stuff in there that just has never been put out before, and so the decision to cut all the Late Show stuff that he cut. I can't imagine it was an easy one, but I do understand why he did it. But now I have said to him in not so many words and in so many words, absolutely bluntly, Jason, if ever it's possible to read any of these things that were unblocked, I would be fascinated to read them.
Absolutely, yeah.
So far, crickets.
I do understand his perspective because if you weren't a fan of Letterman from maybe 92 to 96, maybe even 97, I mean, it was an article a week. There's stuff you can Google right now to learn basically everything he ate on any given day.
Yep.
In those
Time
times.
Magazine. He was on the cover of Time Magazine. Like
and
he was
good
the biggest
with
story in
interviews.
entertainment when Letterman moved over to CBS,
Right.
and it was white hot.
And he was good. He was good with Larry King when Tom Snyder came in. There are a lot of interviews with Dave during that
Charlie
period.
Rose as well.
Yeah, right. That you don't normally see. So I do get it. I was just kind of curious more than anything on that. How do you get the big?
I'll tell you this though, Chris. I was happy to hang with those guys like Zinnemann, Bill Carter. Like Bill Carter. Oh my gosh. You talk about an episode that was like, for me, 25 years in the making. I wanted to have a conversation with this man so badly for so long. And I'll tell you this, the fact that I could hang with him was incredible. It's part of the reason that my imposter syndrome is starting to leave me. I think when we're ready to finish, I'm going to go back to the Shecky story and finish that off because I think that would be a great place for us to kind of finish. But I had an insane amount of imposter syndrome, and as each episode goes by, it starts to alleviate, and some guests make it alleviate more than others. Bill Carter might be the guy where it alleviated the most because I could hang with him. And I mean, This is a guy that I don't know if there's anybody more educated on the behind the scenes of television, but specifically late night television, walking the earth than Bill Carter. And being able to go back and forth, and I've had him on the show since then. He enjoys talking to me. Are you kidding me? I mean, that there was incredible. So the journalists, they like to pick things apart the way that I do, and they have observations that are just they're unique, but they're also clinical in many respects. They take emotion out of it, and it's so much fun to do that. So yes, those are some of my favorite. If I could do an episode one a month with Bill Carter, I would. And who knows? You never know what's going to happen with him on Late Nighter. You just never know what might come down the pipe on that. So. And Zinnemann, same thing. He's just such a there's such cool guys to talk to about this stuff.
I always tell people, I've been in broadcasting for 20 years, and I think I've been competent for about 3 of them. But when you meet a fellow broadcaster and you're able to, like you said, toe to toe, you're with them, you're there, it's bang, 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 I can do this. And that happens to everybody at a certain age, and I always tell young broadcasters that. One of these days, I do a lot of sports stuff, so this is in a sports example, but one of these days you're going to call a game and it's going to be so good that you're going to think you're Vin Scully. Now, you're not Vin Scully. Nobody's Vin Scully. But you at least think you could do it. You know what I mean? And that's.
But are you Harry Carey?
No, well, 6 or 7 in, maybe.
You know what I call it? It's the flow. It's the flow state because, yes, you're not one of these guys, but you feel like you are because you are doing exactly like – I'm a financial planner by trade. Part of the, I've wanted to do this, but I didn't know when I was a kid that I could. I didn't have that moment where, like Dave did, where he said he's going to move to California and take his shot, go to the Comedy Store, learn the discipline that he didn't know. He knew broadcasting, but he didn't know stand-up.
Right.
Told people, I'm going to be a writer, because that was something that people would maybe potentially accept, but that wasn't at all what he wanted to do. What he wanted to do was learn the discipline of stand-up so he could be a comedy broadcaster like that of Johnny Carson. It's such an outrageous dream for a Midwest kid that people would like you. Why? Like you talk about imposter syndrome, like that. If I ever have the chance to have him on the show, that is going to be a question I have for him. Is I want to talk about imposter syndrome a little bit and how he made that decision and how it happened. And but the thing is, though, I imagine that there were moments where he felt like he was doing it, whether it was on the stage, whether it was, maybe the first time he guest hosted the Tonight Show, that sort of a thing, where you get in the zone, the flow, where you feel like you are doing what you were meant to do. During HeCast, I experienced that for the first time. I'm experiencing it right now. I am having so much fun talking with you, Chris. It feels like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This podcasting thing, this medium has just captivated me. And, I enjoy it so much. It is so – time just doesn't exist when we're doing this. It's such a cool experience. And so I don't know how good I am at it. I just know that it feels like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
I wonder that about Dave myself now, and I'm thinking maybe not, but it sounds like, and I think this is even in Jason's book, I remember when he tanked purposely the game show hosting gig. That's in Jason's book, but I'm also thinking about the hecklers. When I hear other comedians who were at the Comedy Store with Dave, I don't know if Dave knew he was going to make it because he seemed to really hate doing stand-up.
Yep.
But he really reveled when he would get heckled. And it just became batting practice. And Leno and Tom Dreesen and all of those guys would gather praying that somebody would get out of control with Letterman. Because that's something I think I would enjoy about stand-up. I thought about stand-up myself, but there's just so damn many of them now. I mean,
but that being said, I've done stand up probably 6 or 7 times. I've never ate a plate. I've never completely bombed. I've gotten laughs every single time I've done it. Even if they were polite, mild ones, I'll count them. I said something clever enough that got some Snickers, whatever.
That might have been your best joke, Mike.
Could have been.
I like that.
Could have been. But I don't want to tell this story because I won't do it justice. But Dave wanted to learn the discipline. And I would submit to you learning the discipline and that being the outcome is just so you understand the discipline, what it's like to, have the crickets, what it's like to prepare a piece of material that you could present and see how entertaining it is. I imagine for you, Chris, it actually would be quite easy for you to have a good experience doing it. But that being said, he wanted to learn the discipline. He said that a couple of times. The best heckler story, I think, is, and look for it online because I won't do it justice, is Tom Dreesen talking about when Ringo Starr was heckling Dave and Dave didn't know it was Ringo Starr. And Dave again used him like a comedy speed bag.
Yeah, right.
And when he found out it was Ringo Starr, the line that he says was so funny, and it's such a good example of how Dave. One of the things that Dave said to Tom Snyder during the morning show, he said it. I think he was on the Tomorrow Show talking about the morning show before it was canceled. And Dave said that there is nothing sacred on television. There's nothing sacred.
Right.
Nothing about television is sacred, and which basically, is giving himself carte blanche to lampoon anything he wants.
Right.
And I suspect that he probably felt the same when he was on stage, and just because his style isn't to go vulgar or graphic or anything, he stays smart. He's like Muhammad Ali. He dances. And stays and does it with intelligence and vocabulary and attitude. I don't think that it was sacred that he was, Ringo Starr was heckling him. And so he treated him like he would any other heckler,
Right.
even though Dave has also talked about the reverence he feels for the Beatles. So I always find that fascinating. That's another question that I would love to talk to Dave about, because Dave does enjoy talking about the Comedy Store days. And so that's a moment that I would love to kind of kick around with him if ever I have the opportunity to talk to him.
Have you thought about that? Have you kind of treaded water, or are you just doing your thing for now and not even approaching that subject with anybody?
What should I say here? I have a direct pipe. No, you know what? I'll be very straightforward. I have a direct pipeline. That if a message needs to get through to Dave himself, it could be. I've got a couple of pipelines where that could happen.
Right.
Have I asked him to be on the show? Yep. The answer so far has been a very polite, nope, not what we do. And I don't really want to say who the pipeline is. There's a couple of them, but I don't want to say who they are. But that being said, I don't think that the door has closed. When I had Joanna Jordan on, Joanna Jordan was she is potentially, I would say that Joanna Jordan is probably the most powerful booking agent, talent. She owns a Central Talent Booking, and she was Letterman's booker for a long, long time. And then I think it was in 2007, 2008, she decided to go out on her own and start her own company, because her Rolodex was such where it was all A-listers and presidents and all of the best athletes and everybody. And so she went out and started Central Talent Booking. And her first client was Worldwide Pants, was Late Show with David Letterman. And then she also booked Kimmel and all of these other places. And now, like, if you want to book an A-lister, go to Central Talent Booking. You can book them, or at least explore the opportunity. And Joanna Jordan, when she came on the show, one of the things that she did say to me, she goes, "Well, there will be a time where," because she knows what I want to do with the show. She knows that I've already won as far as I'm concerned. I don't want to necessarily make money from it. I mean, it'd be great, don't get me wrong, to do this as a career, but that does not predicate my enthusiasm or it. I mean, I'm going to keep doing this thing no matter what, unless Dave was to say to me, "Mike, please stop doing this show," which I do not believe is going to happen, because, I'm friendly with Worldwide Pants. Rupert G, when he retired, I spoke at his retirement, and that retirement party was put on by Worldwide Pants. They let me speak there.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Like, Chris, like, I know you understand this. You tell 21-year-old Mike that he is going to speak at Rupert G's retirement party at some point and actually elicit emotional response from the people that you worship, that put this show on.
Right.
21-year-old Mike is going to look at you like you got three eyes and say, "There's no possible way that could ever happen." Like, we're talking a moonshot, dream come true moment. And I've had, Chris, dozens of them. So I don't think they're going to tell me to stop doing the show. Joanna Jordan maintains that, once I start getting, I don't want to tell tales out of school, but an example being like the Ray Romano type people,
right,
or the Jonah Hill type people who worship Dave or were, but weren't allowed to ever talk about it. But now here's a venue where they can talk about it, and they can talk about their first time they were on Letterman and what it was like and the behind the scenes and all that. She said at some point it's going to get to the point where they have to reckon with me, were the words that she used.
Right.
So I've asked politely. It's been no so far. I think there's a couple opportunities coming up where I may, you know what, this episode's probably going to come out after the fact. In early May, I'm going to see Dave perform, and hopefully down in LA. And I hope that I'm in the second row, and hopefully the pipeline will be open for, a meet and greet or something even a little bit more. And who knows what it turns into. I'm just enjoying, like, one of the things I really appreciate is being present. And I don't want to think too much about the future, because I don't want to even for a second miss the moments that I'm having, because I'm thinking about what the next moment might be. Like, I'm trying to be hyper present. I'm trying to put my mental video recorder on slow motion as I'm having these conversations. Willie's coming back on this Thursday. And I can't wait. He's a friend of mine now. Willie is the bass player, of course, for Paul's band for 32 years. And I am so excited to talk to my friend on camera. It's going to be an episode, and I hope it goes as slow as humanly possible because I get so much enjoyment doing it.
Well, I mean, no Dave so far. But
no Dave so far.
You've had Paul.
Yep. Paul was our one-year anniversary guest last year. Yep.
You've had Dick Cavett. You've had some really, really big names. I want to know. Let's take a break from Dave and give his ears a break.
Sure.
How did you? The process with Dick Cavett, I'm curious about, just from start to finish, really.
No. That was one of the higher honors of my life. The thing is, though, I treat every single one of these guests, whether if they were an intern for 6 months, they get the same treatment that Mr. Cavett gets. That being said, there's obvious gravity for some of these guests, and Dick and Paul, probably near the top when it comes to the gravity in the gravity department. Even though I would, treat everybody else just the same in my excitement for it. Dick was a result of there's a writer who I've become very good friends with, named Steve Weiner. And he's been on the show 3 times. Shecky hooked me up with Steve early on. So Shecky, when he helped me with the show, and I mean, that's a little foreshadowing to how we'll end this thing. But Shecky hooked me up with Steve, and I went out and met Steve in person when I went out to New York at one point, and we just clicked. And Steve was a writer for the show the very first year and came up with a couple Letterman hallmarks. Number one, he is the guy who discovered Calvert DeForest.
Oh.
Calvert DeForest, Larry Bud Melman, was in his and his writing partner Carl Tiedeman's NYU student movie called King of the Z's. And actually, King of the Z's, it's like I forget how many. I think it's 20 minutes long. We're actually going to do a commentary over King of the Z's, which Larry Bud Melman or Calvert DeForest is featured in almost the entire thing, or a big chunk of it, where he and I are going to go through and do kind of a retrospective on it, and that's not been done.
Oh, I can't
so that's going to be a lot of fun.
Cannot wait.
Yeah, that's going to be great. And so Steve is, but he was only he also the pencil being thrown through the window and the glass breaking. Steve wrote that.
Right. So
we're talking, two. Even though he was at the show for a year, and then when Jim Downey and the Saturday Night Live guys came in, that's when he and Carl were let go. Those are 2 things about Dave that basically stayed right till the very end. They would have kept Larry Bud Melman on to the end of Late Show if he hadn't passed away. Same with the glass breaking was they might have even done it in the last show.
Right.
I know the Simpsons tribute in the last show. They said the Simpsons sent a clip over. That was the moment they used. So yeah, the glass did break. Steve wrote that, and he is an old time entertainment guy. He knew Jack Rollins very well. Dave's manager back then, who legendary manager. I want to do an entire episode on Jack Rollins. I'm hoping that I've got some stuff in the can. Hopefully that's gonna come out, and we'll be able to do something really fun for Jack. But he knows a lot of people. He wrote for Robert Klein for years after he left, and he knows a lot of these people. And so I'm sitting there walking with him and his wife one day in New York. And we're walking down towards the wharf. They live on the Upper East Side, and they're walking down. I'm gonna take the boat around under the bridges so I can get to downtown. And they're showing me how to do it. We're just hanging out as friends. And I said, I'd just love to have Cavett on the show. I'd love to have Mr. Dick Cavett on the show. That would be incredible. And Steve kind of looks at his wife Lori, and Lori kind of shrugs and goes, "Well, I think I could get you a phone number."
Wow.
And I'm like, "What?" Literally. And I've had so many moments like this, Chris, where it just doors just go boop, 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 and they just open. And a couple weeks later, I get a phone number, and it's Dick's amazing wife, and she picks up, and we have a 45-minute conversation that is absolutely delightful. And they have got some things coming up. There's a wedding happening and a few other things. She goes, "But I think in September, I think we can probably do it." I'm like, "Okay." And it was an unbelievable experience. Dick really liked me. he liked me a lot. I actually want to have him back on the show. I think we can make that happen here pretty soon. We had such a lovely conversation.
It's one of my favorite episodes you did, honestly. He is just everybody calls him, kind of the intelligent broadcaster, I don't have the vocabulary to compete with Dick Cavett, but
nobody
or even
does.
to give the adjectives to properly describe Dick Cavett. But
and the master of the pommel horse.
Yes, and you did a really wonderful job with him. I really enjoyed that episode a lot.
Hearing you say that really, really means a lot to me.
Oh, no, it does not. Who am I?
No, it does, because you're in broadcasting, and at the end of the day, I understand that. At the end of the day, I'm an armchair broadcaster.
I'm not in broadcasting. I am teetering on the edge of it.
Okay, well, we're similar that way.
Yes.
Dick is just an amazing guy, and with an amazing career, and he is humble, yet confident, which is very interesting to me because his presentation is. But he is so humble and he's so giving. Every time I hear Stephen Colbert talk about it, it brings a huge smile to my face because he talks about how he's a friend. He calls him Mr. Dick Cavett many times, and that delights me. That absolutely delights me. That one of the top guys in late night, it has a friendship with Dick Cavett. And I'm just really, really delighted by that.
I hear some restlessness behind you. Do you have a young kids?
I have a granddaughter.
Oh, a granddaughter! Wow.
She's my favorite thing in the world. She's absolutely my favorite thing in the world. I love my granddaughter so much.
And I could hear her, and I can hear she's telling us to go back to the Shecky story.
We're moving into the close.
Yeah.
So, Chris, just so you know, I'll do this with you anytime you like. So this has been a lot of fun, and it really, really is. This is where my dream was shattered and brought back. Shecky tells me he's going on this Letterman podcast. And you can see on the Zoom call on the panel, you can see my heart kind of break because now the inevitable has happened. There is in fact a Letterman podcast. Shecky's going on it. The ship has sailed, and it's not going to be me.
Right.
Even though I had no earthly chance for it to happen, of course I didn't. And you can kind of see me wrestling with it in my head. It's like, oh, what podcast is that, Rick? And, and he starts talking about it. I'm like, well, you just described my dream job, and people laughed. And I'm like, oh, tell me about it. Once you're done, Rick, you let me know. And so a few hours later, I get a call from Rick, and he goes, oh, yeah. It wasn't a Letterman podcast. I was on the Carson podcast, and it was Mark Malkoff's Carson podcast that he was on. And suddenly, I now know what it's like to have my ultimate dream squished. And suddenly it exists again. And within a few weeks, I started talking to Rick about it. I said, Rick, I want to do this. And I use language because he is a cinephile. I use language that he understands. And Rick said, what's the worst that can happen? Go for it. And I'm like, really? He goes, yeah. And I'm like, all right. And I said, but if I do this, I'm going to need a consigliere. and I use that, of course, because he is such a cinephile, right? I said I need a Tom Hagen is actually what I said. I do the Godfather reference.
It makes total sense.
And Rick said, Mike, I'm there for you. And he gave me a couple of contacts right then and there. Steve actually might have been one of them, now that I think about it. And he helped me. And it pains me, Chris, because right now, I actually the revelation happened while I was shooting an episode. I actually have done the Letterman podcast longer with Rick having passed than when I had him now, which is really, really weird for me. But he loved what I was doing. And I mean, he gave me notes because he saw me stumbling forward. He knew I was an amateur that was desperately wanting to grow into a pro. And the last few weeks before he passed on us in March of last year, March of 2023, he passed. He was like the Felicia Collins episode, he gushed about that episode. He gushed about a few of the episodes that I was doing at that point, and gave me so many amazing notes. And when he passed, it was a massive blow. And so I would say to anybody who has stomached this conversation for this long and is still here, first off, what is the matter with you? Second off, I hope the parole hearing goes well. But third, go onto the Letterman channel and look at the tribute to Rick Sheckman. They have his entire funeral, or his memorial, which is called Sheckfest. They have an entire thing on there, and there are so many Letterman alumni that appear on that. And Rick Sheckman he's a gem. He's, if I can use the word and be correct, he's a mensch. Rick is he is the consigliere of the Letterman podcast. And as far as I'm concerned, he's the guy that gave me the permission and potentially even the legitimacy to do this show. And so I love you, Rick.
It's a shame what life is, and when we have to say goodbye, and it is going to become more frequent, unfortunately, with a lot of these people, these great people who, as I started the podcast with saying, were so important to my formidable years, so important to your formidable years, and now into your adulthood. And I'm so glad for you to have had that experience with him. I always tell people, everybody's going to croak. Every one of us is going to find that same rough ending.
Yep.
But if you get those moments with those people, and if you are the kind of person like my guest today, Mike Chisholm, and you savor those moments, it's going to be a little bit easier for you. It's going to be a little bit easier for you to understand, to deal with, and to look back on. So, Mike, this was wonderful, man. This is really, really wonderful. From one Letterman nerd to another. Oh my God! You know what? We didn't talk about the Dons at all. So let's end with this, because I think in addition to the Letterman YouTube, the Dons did a pretty nice little mini tribute to Shecky as well that you can go check out, and you can check out a whole bunch of compilations that the Dons did that Dave's folks in Worldwide Pants has been kind enough to let him keep. Yep. And so yeah, I think if Shecky was the I can't do it. I can't do it. The Tom Hagen, that's how a good broadcaster does that. Then the Dons might be I don't know, Michael, maybe Sonny. I don't know.
He is Don Giller is a force of nature, and including all of the aspects that a force of nature would include. And I'll tell you this, the way that I describe my relationship with Don Giller, I honestly don't think I ever would have gotten the time of day from him if I hadn't had so many factual inaccuracies in the Letterman in early episodes of the Letterman podcast, because I think that frustration of inaccuracy trumped anything else. And so the way I describe my relationship with Don is I think I'm Dennis the Menace and he is Mr. Wilson. And he
wonderful.
Puts up with me. There are definite times of camaraderie, some of it being hesitant, of course, and perhaps even bitter camaraderie, but I appreciate him so much, and what he has done to keep the Letterman spirit alive. I've been to his apartment a couple of times. We've talked about that. He's been on the show a bunch of times,
right?
And I cannot thank Don Giller enough for letting me, perhaps like a termite, crawl under the layers a little bit, and he did. He kept, when Dave retired. And went dark for a while, Don kicked in to high gear and put up these amazing compilations. And if you want to do a deep dive, go to Don Giller's YouTube channel. My favorite is the talk show series he did. It's like 7 parts. Each part is like an hour and a half. and it's every single talk show host that has ever been on Late Night or Late Show with David Letterman in chronological order for each one.
Yep.
And it changes the way you view this amazing broadcast work that we love so much, because you see the evolution of Dave as an interviewer, of the, the production value of the show and all of the little things like that. But also you also see the reverence that Dave has for all of these people, including Dick Cavett. One of my very favorite clips, by the way, Dick Cavett's favorite clip of David Letterman, or a moment with David Letterman, was when he and Eddie Murphy were on the show together. Watch that clip. Yeah. Oh, is it good? With Dick Cavett and Eddie Murphy on Late Night with David Letterman. So many of these memories are there on Don's channel. And the fact that he has come into, and I'm not saying anything that's not public, an arrangement with Worldwide Pants where that channel still gets to exist. And the fact that Don helps out officially, to me, again, it's one of those moments where I'm so happy for a guy like him who loved this thing and put in so much effort for so long, that he gets to be a part of things. That delights me to no end.
Yeah, he is. We are fans. He is the number one fan, and
yep.
For 40 years, he has had way too much time on his hands, and we are all blessed because of it. All right,
the
Mike,
ultimate archivist.
Mike, we gotta go here.
Yep.
The Letterman Podcast. You can find it pretty much everywhere, right?
Yeah, it's on the Apple, it's on the Spotify. I think it's on other platforms as well. It's on YouTube. I think YouTube's probably the best way to view it, only because,
I do too.
Yeah, there's a lot of visuals on the show. Spotify has video as well. Apple doesn't. But yeah, it's everywhere. And if you could like, share, subscribe, that'd be awesome. Even if you don't, I'm still doing the show anyway.
Mike, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
You rock, Chris. Let's make sure we keep our connection going outside of this, please. And I wish you the best of luck with your show and any other podcast hosts I come into contact with. I'm gonna forward to you, because I really love the premise of what you're doing. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for giving me some time. And you're a phenomenal listener and an even better host. So thank you so much.
Oh, that's very kind of you, Mike. Thank you.